You are constantly changing and breaking the reality of the people around you. But they don't realize that it's you operating this transformation. While you believe you're consciously choosing your words and actions, your internal state has already completely determined how others will respond to you before you even open your mouth. Generation after generation repeats the same fundamental mistake, searching for ready-made phrases and external techniques, while remaining blind to the pattern of limitation that replicates itself indefinitely through time. You think you're someone trying to influence others, but who are you really when every person you meet functions as a direct mirror of your own unintegrated aspects? Less than 1% of the population operates from the fifth lens of perception, in which they recognize that other people's madness reflects their own denied madness. This means that you're not living your life. You're perpetuating an inherited state of consciousness that determines every interaction, every opportunity, and every limitation you experience. The question isn't whether you'll continue unconsciously commanding reality through your unexamined patterns, but whether you'll awaken to the fact that it's always been you creating your own prison.
There's a fundamental difference between those who truly command reality and those who merely repeat empty formulas. The first group represents less than 1% of the world's population, and they operate through a principle that completely transcends any superficial technique of communication or persuasion. This principle establishes that command emerges directly from the state of consciousness you embody, not from the words you memorize or the scripts you learn. When someone genuinely commands reality, they're operating from the principle of their higher self, the primordial causal substance of all manifestation. Neville Goddard established that consciousness is the only reality and that your concept of yourself completely determines the world in which you live. What does this mean in practice? It means that when you become the command, when your own consciousness completely embodies what you wish to express, others automatically synchronize with your established frequency. You don't need to convince them. You don't need to persuade them. They simply accept the reality you project as true in that moment. Notice how most people approach command situations. They desperately search for the right words, the perfect psychological triggers, and the most sophisticated NLP techniques. They believe that if they can learn the exact sequence of words that the successful salesperson uses, they'll have the same results. This approach consistently fails because it ignores the fundamental truth. You are constantly changing and breaking the reality of the people around you, often without them realizing who's operating this transformation. And this happens not because of what you say, but because of what you are. Consider this phenomenon. Two people can pronounce exactly the same words, in the same sequence, with the same intonation. One of them instantly commands the attention and respect of everyone in the room. The other is completely ignored, as if they were invisible. Why? The answer lies in each person's state of consciousness. The first person has completely assumed the feeling of being what they express. They think from that state, not about it. The second is trying to imitate external behaviors while internally remaining in a state of insecurity and doubt. When you understand that your higher self is that which, among countless forms, always remains the same, you realize that all real command emerges from this unchanging source. You stop seeking external validation because you understand that you're reorganizing the very causal substance of reality through your assumption. The people around you have no choice but to respond to the level of internal certainty you project, because this certainty isn't an opinion or a belief. It's the very structure of reality that you've established through your consciousness. Here's what separates the 1% from the rest. They understand that controlled imagination and sustained attention, focused on the feeling of the wish fulfilled, constitute the true secret. There's no power in the words themselves. The power resides exclusively in who you've become when you pronounce them. If someone with deep social anxiety received the best sales script ever created, that script would instantly become useless in their hands. Why? because command naturally bleeds from you when it exists internally. If it doesn't exist, you remain a child doing embarrassing card tricks, trying to impress adults who see through your performance. You're operating under the illusion that you need to learn something new, when in reality, you need to become something different. The transformation requires you to assume the feeling of already being what you wish to command. This isn't pretending or acting, it's the literal reorganization of the causal substance through your assumed consciousness. When you completely master your own internal reality, your mental and emotional states and your fundamental presence, you project a field in which others naturally operate according to your established rules. People hand over money from banks, sign million-dollar contracts, and yield valuable resources not because they were convinced by logical arguments or manipulated by psychological techniques. They do it because they've temporarily accepted the reality that someone with true command has established as true in that moment, and that someone wasn't trying to command. They simply were the command, embodied and manifested through their completely assumed state of being. Your perception determines your power more than anything else. There's a specific progression through which human consciousness evolves, and each level of this progression completely shapes your ability to command reality. There are 5 distinct lenses through which you can see the world and people, and the lens you use determines whether you remain a slave to circumstances or become master of your destiny. The first lens is the one through which you see all people as fundamentally broken or defective. When you operate at this level of perception, every human behavior becomes evidence of some underlying pathology. If someone shows shyness, you immediately diagnose social anxiety. If someone expresses ambition, you identify a compensatory inferiority complex. This lens transforms every interaction into an opportunity to identify what needs to be fixed in others, as if you were the unsolicited therapist of the entire world. The fundamental problem with this perspective is that it keeps you trapped in separation consciousness, positioning yourself as a superior observer who analyzes others' defects without realizing that you're projecting your own internal fragmentation. The second lens functions through the systematic categorization of people into predefined personality types. At this level, you believe that the key to understanding and commanding people lies in discovering which category they belong to. You study behavioral classification systems, apply personality tests, and distribute labels that attempt to capture human essence in simplified definitions. Each person becomes a specific type with predictable characteristics, and you believe you've discovered the instruction manual for human nature. But this approach only creates another system of separation, generating endless conflicts about which type is better, which combination works, and which classification is more accurate. You remain observing humans as classifiable specimens, never penetrating the living consciousness behind the labels. The third lens reduces people to sets of observable data and measurable behavioral patterns. Here you transcend emotional judgment and abandon simplistic categories, but you transform human interactions into cold equations of cause and effect. You analyze facial microexpressions to detect lies, calculate behavior probabilities based on observed history, and predict reactions through statistical models. There's evolution in this approach because you remove emotional bias from observation, but by transforming people into data, you create an insurmountable barrier between you and the living experience of human connection. It's power without resonance, command without communion. The fourth lens represents a quantum leap because here you finally begin to understand the deep reasons behind every human behavior. Instead of diagnosing pathologies or categorizing types, you identify the emotional fuel and fundamental wounds that motivate seemingly irrational actions. When you encounter someone who explodes in anger over trivial matters, you recognize the inner child desperately trying to protect itself from being hurt again. When you observe someone consistently sabotaging their own success, you perceive the deeply internalized unworthiness pattern that makes failure more comfortable than achievement. This lens allows operation through genuine compassion because you understand that all behavior arises from attempts to fill unmet fundamental needs. The fifth and most powerful lens completely dissolves the illusion that you and others are separate entities. In this revolutionary perception, each person you meet functions as a direct mirror of your own unintegrated aspects. When you're irritated by someone's arrogance, you're seeing your own denied arrogance. When you admire someone else's courage, you're recognizing latent courage within yourself. The flaws that most bother you in others are precisely the shadows you refuse to acknowledge in your own consciousness. Neville Goddard demonstrated this through the principle that your particular relationship with another completely influences your perception of them, and if you can change your opinion about someone, then what you believed wasn't the absolute truth, but merely a reflection of your own state of consciousness. Until you reach at least the fourth level of perception, you continue treating people as external objects to be manipulated, controlled, or intellectually understood. And this is insecurity disguised as knowledge. True command arises only when you consistently operate from the fifth level, where every human interaction becomes an opportunity to recognize and integrate undeveloped aspects of your own infinite consciousness. Those who reach this supreme level naturally command reality because they're no longer trying to change, fix, or control others. Instead, they use every encounter as a catalyst to expand and refine their own state of being. People automatically respond to the depth of self-awareness you project, manifesting in your presence exactly what your perception allows them to be. Real command doesn't adjust superficial behaviors. It controls the very structure of shared reality. When you understand that consciousness is the only substance from which all experience emerges, you realize that mastering your internal reality means projecting a field of influence that others can't resist. This field operates beyond common conscious perception, establishing invisible parameters within which other people naturally function. The mechanism through which this occurs was articulated by Neville Goddard when he established that consciousness, although expressed in an infinite series of levels, is not divisible. There's only one higher self manifesting in legions of forms. When you completely master your own state of consciousness, when you achieve absolute mastery over your mental and emotional states, you're literally reorganizing the primordial substance from which all experience arises. Other human beings, being expressions of the same unified consciousness, naturally synchronize with the dominant pattern you establish. Consider how this works in practice. When someone enters a room completely dominated by anxiety and insecurity, that person projects a field of instability that everyone subconsciously perceives. Conversations become uncomfortable, interactions feel forced, and the entire dynamic of the environment changes to accommodate this fragmented state of consciousness. Conversely, when someone who has achieved absolute internal mastery enters the same space, the entire environment reorganizes around their stable presence. People naturally calm down, conversations flow with ease, and important decisions seem to arise spontaneously. This isn't charisma or personal magnetism in the conventional sense. It's the practical demonstration of the principle that your consciousness is the only reality, conceiving yourself as something and becoming what you've conceived. When you maintain unwavering attention on the feeling of your wish fulfilled, when your controlled imagination consistently sustains a specific reality, the external world has no choice but to conform to this vision. Circumstances rearrange themselves, people change their behaviors, and opportunities appear from nowhere, all because you've established a new configuration in the fundamental causal substance. The secret that separates those who truly command from those who merely try to influence lies in understanding that you must think from the desired state, not about it. There's a radical difference between knowing something mentally, observing it from the outside, comparing it with other things, analyzing it, and knowing something spiritually, becoming it completely. You must be the thing itself, not merely talk about it or observe it. Like the moth that, in its desire to know the flame, plunges into the sacred fire until it becomes one color and substance with it, you must be willing to dissolve your previous identity into the new consciousness you wish to embody. When you understand this deeply, you realize why words without self-mastery become completely empty, regardless of how well crafted they are. If someone operating from a state of conscious poverty tries to affirm wealth, their words carry the vibration of lack, not abundance. If someone consumed by fear tries to project courage, their energy field transmits terror, not confidence. The reality you inhabit internally always supersedes any attempt to fake or perform externally. People hand over fortunes, yield valuable properties, and completely change their lives, not because they were logically convinced or emotionally manipulated. They do it because they've temporarily accepted as true the reality that someone with absolute command has established. That someone wasn't using techniques or strategies. They were simply being so completely what they projected that they created an impenetrable field of certainty. Within this field, doubts cannot exist, resistance dissolves, and what seemed impossible becomes inevitable. The key is understanding that you're not trying to change people or circumstances directly. You're altering your own state of consciousness so completely that you project a reality in which these changes have already occurred. When you maintain absolute fidelity to the assumption that you already are what you wish to be, when you consistently live from that assumed state, the external world reorganizes to confirm your internal conviction. This explains why some people seem to live in a completely different universe, where opportunities constantly arise, where doors open effortlessly, and where others naturally offer help and resources. They're not operating in the same reality field as most people. Through mastery of their internal consciousness, they've established different parameters for their experience, and everyone who enters their orbit is temporarily pulled into this alternative reality where different laws seem to operate. Salespeople and coaches around the world perpetuate a fundamental deception that keeps millions trapped in powerlessness. The belief that command resides in what you do, not in what you are. Entire industries have been built on this illusion, producing endless libraries of sales scripts, persuasion formulas, and closing sequences that promise to transform anyone into a master of influence. This deception persists because it addresses the visible symptom while completely ignoring the invisible cause. When companies identify their most successful salesperson and try to replicate their success, they invariably follow the same flawed pattern. They meticulously transcribe every word they pronounce, document every gesture, and time every pause. They create detailed manuals, record training videos, and conduct workshops where other employees practice repeating exactly the same phrases, in the same sequence, with the same intonation. The result is always identical. Sales plummet, effectiveness disappears, and everyone is perplexed trying to understand where they went wrong. The standard corporate response involves adjusting the phrases, modifying the script, adding new psychological triggers, and incorporating more sophisticated NLP techniques. They never question the fundamental premise that words carry the power. They never recognize that the successful salesperson isn't succeeding because of what they say, but because of the state of consciousness from which their words emerge. They've completely assumed the feeling of having already made the sale before even opening their mouth. Their consciousness has established a reality in which the customer's buying is the natural and inevitable conclusion. Neville Goddard articulated this principle when he established that an assumption, though false if persisted in, hardens into fact. The successful salesperson isn't trying to convince anyone. They've already internally assumed that the transaction is complete. Their words are merely the vehicle through which this internal certainty expresses itself. But any set of words would serve equally well, because the power resides in their assumed state, not in their verbalization. Consider the fundamental nature of consciousness as the causal substance of all manifestation. When you pronounce words from a state of doubt, need, or desperation, those words carry the frequency of that state, regardless of their literal content. You can recite affirmations about abundance while vibrating at the frequency of scarcity, and the universe responds to your real vibration, not to your empty words. You can memorize the most powerful closes ever created. But if your internal state screams insecurity, that's what you transmit. The problem worsens when people invest fortunes in programs that promise to teach the magic words, the hypnotic phrases, and the embedded commands that supposedly bypass conscious resistance. They practice diligently, memorize complex scripts, and master elaborate language techniques. Then they enter real situations and discover that all this accumulated knowledge becomes dead weight. Why? Because they're operating from the wrong premise that command is something you apply externally, not something you embody internally. Your worldview represents the true bottleneck, not your memorization capacity or your verbal eloquence. You're obsessively focusing on perfecting symptoms while ignoring the root cause. It's like polishing the surface of a mirror, hoping to change the reflected image without realizing you need to change what's being reflected. Every technique you learn, every script you memorize, and every strategy you master becomes instantly useless if you haven't transformed the state of consciousness from which you operate. The evidence of this truth is everywhere, but few have eyes to see. Observe how small children, without knowledge of persuasion techniques, manage to completely command adults. They don't know scripts, haven't studied psychology, and haven't practiced closings. But when they completely assume they deserve something, when they totally inhabit the state of having already received, sophisticated adults yield to their demands. The child isn't using special words. They're operating from a state of absolute certainty that adults have lost in their attempts to appear reasonable. The real work doesn't consist of accumulating more techniques or memorizing better scripts. It consists of recognizing that you must internally become what you wish to command externally when you assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, when you maintain disciplined attention on that assumed state until it completely dominates your consciousness. The right words arise spontaneously. More importantly, any word you pronounce will carry the power of your assumed state. Reality command exists in you, or it doesn't exist. If it exists, it manifests naturally through any means of expression. If it doesn't exist, no amount of technique or preparation can fabricate it. You remain trying to do tricks that everyone perceives as artificial, as desperate attempts to appear powerful while feeling powerless. The solution was never to learn more. It was always to become more, to expand your consciousness to embody the state you wish to express. Confidence doesn't build through addition. It emerges through systematic subtraction of what obscures your essential nature. Every conventional approach to confidence development operates from the wrong premise that you need to add something that's missing: more knowledge, better skills, more expensive clothes, and better posture. This additive approach fails because it starts from the assumption that you're fundamentally deficient and need to be improved. The truth operates in the opposite direction. You're already the perfect expression of divine consciousness, but layers of conditioning obscure this reality. Notice how all traditional advice about confidence focuses exclusively on external symptoms. Maintain firm eye contact, the experts say, as if looking into someone's eyes could substitute for internal certainty. Project your voice, keep your shoulders back, and take up space in the environment. Dress well, shake hands firmly, and smile with calculated frequency. Each of these instructions treats external manifestations as if they were causes, when in reality, they're just natural effects of a specific internal state. When someone genuinely embodies absolute confidence, these behaviors arise spontaneously, without conscious effort or premeditation. Eye contact happens naturally because there's no fear of what will be seen or judged. Posture aligns perfectly because the body expresses the expanded state of consciousness. The voice resonates with authority because it emerges from a place of deep knowledge about one's own divine nature. Trying to fabricate these symptoms without the corresponding internal state is like painting fruit on a dead tree, hoping it will appear alive. Neville Goddard revealed the real mechanism through which authentic transformation occurs. You must abandon yourself to your ideal as a woman abandons herself to love, in complete surrender. This doesn't mean adding characteristics to your current repertoire, but dissolving the barriers that prevent the natural expression of what you already are. Every limiting belief you carry, every story of inadequacy you repeat, and every memory of failure you cultivate. These are the additions that need to be subtracted, not improvements that need to be implemented. The process of subtraction begins when you recognize that every feeling of deficiency arises from misidentification with temporary states of consciousness. You experienced moments of insecurity and concluded, "I am insecure." You encountered situations where you didn't know how to proceed and decided, "I am incompetent." You received criticism and internalized, "I am inadequate." Each of these conclusions represents a layer of conditioning added over your essential nature, like sediment covering a diamond, obscuring its natural brilliance, but never altering its fundamental structure. The removal happens through what Goddard called disciplined imagination and well-sustained attention focused on the feeling of the wish fulfilled. But notice that this isn't the addition of something new. It's the systematic return to the natural state through the removal of everything that contradicts this reality. When you maintain unwavering attention on the consciousness of already being what you wish to express, you're actively dissolving every layer of contrary conditioning. You're not learning confidence, you're unlearning insecurity. There's a crucial difference between trying to become confident and simply removing everything that prevents the natural expression of confidence that always existed. The first approach implies that you're fundamentally lacking and need to acquire something external. The second recognizes that you're the very source from which all confidence emerges, but you've allowed temporary experiences to create permanent identifications that now obscure this truth. When you understand this deeply, you realize why people who spend decades accumulating personal development techniques remain fundamentally insecure. They're adding layer upon layer of strategies, methods, and learned behaviors, creating an increasingly elaborate persona that needs to be maintained with constant effort. Meanwhile, someone who simply removes false identifications experiences effortless confidence because they're not maintaining anything. They're simply being what they always were. The real work consists of systematically identifying and dissolving every belief, every memory, and every thought pattern that contradicts your essential divine nature. When you stop feeding the narrative of limitation, when you cease mentally reviewing past failures, and when you abandon the need to justify your existence through external achievements, what remains is the pure presence of divine consciousness expressed through you. Once you reach this point of internal clarity, where all false identifications have been removed, everything that seems magical to others becomes 10 times easier than they imagine possible. You're not performing with confidence, You've simply removed everything that prevented its natural expression. Command flows effortlessly because there's no internal resistance. The right words arise spontaneously because there's no second guessing. Decisive actions happen naturally because there's no doubt about your ability or right to act. The central question has never involved learning more information or accumulating sophisticated techniques. It has always been about becoming the person capable of exercising real command over reality. If you could genuinely glimpse your latent capabilities, if you could perceive for an instant what you can really become, you would immediately stop asking how to do things and start preparing your nervous system and your identity for the transformation that's available. You decide now in this moment who you're going to become next, and this decision completely determines which reality you'll experience. Self-mastery means reaching the fifth level of perception, where you recognize that each person, each situation, and each challenge you encounter directly mirrors unintegrated aspects of your own infinite consciousness, until you reach at least the fourth level, where you understand the deep reasons and wounds that motivate human behaviors. You continue treating people as external objects to be manipulated or controlled. This is the fundamental difference between those who command and those who merely try to influence. When you completely embody this elevated vision, command flows naturally because you've become the command itself. There's no longer a separation between you and the quality you wish to express. You don't have confidence. You are confidence manifested. You don't possess power. You are the living expression of power. This transformation occurs not through effort or acquisition, but through deep recognition of your real nature and the systematic abandonment of all false identifications. Neville Goddard established that you must experience in imagination what you wish to experience in reality, and by maintaining this imaginary experience, your desire becomes actuality. But notice that this isn't passive visualization or hopeful daydreaming. It's the active reorganization of your fundamental identity through the maintained assumption that you already are what you wish to be. When you assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled and continue in it, you take upon yourself the results of that state. By not assuming the feeling, you remain eternally free from the results. The transformation requires only two things: remembering your real nature and letting go of false conditioning. Remembering means reconnecting with the truth that your individualized, divine consciousness, the higher self itself, experiencing itself through an apparently limited perspective. Letting go means abandoning every story, every belief, and every memory that contradicts this fundamental reality. There's nothing to add, nothing to achieve, and nothing to deserve. There's only the recognition of what has always been true and the courage to live from this truth. The great secret is controlled imagination and well-sustained attention, firmly focused on the object to be realized. But understand that controlling imagination doesn't mean forcing visualizations. It means maintaining absolute fidelity to the assumed state, regardless of external appearances. When circumstances contradict your assumption, you remain faithful to the internal state. When others question your new identity, you maintain the integrity of your vision. When old patterns try to reassume control, you gently return to the consciousness of who you've decided to be. Those who belong to the 1% understand something that escapes most people. Reality is infinitely malleable for those who master their own consciousness. They don't see the world as fixed and unchangeable, but as a fluid and responsive expression of internal states of consciousness. When they change their internal state, the external world reorganizes to correspond. When they assume a new identity, circumstances conspire to confirm that identity. When they maintain disciplined attention on a specific reality, that reality manifests with mathematical precision. You're on the threshold of this same discovery. The only thing that separates you from those who completely command their realities is the willingness to abandon the limited identity you've mistaken for your true self. Every excuse you maintain, every limitation you accept as true, and every story of inadequacy you repeat. These are the chains you've forged yourself and that only you can dissolve. The process isn't complex, but it requires absolute dedication. You must be willing to die to your current self to be reborn as the expanded expression you choose to be. This isn't literal death, but the dissolution of false identifications that have kept you trapped in limiting patterns. Like the moth that completely dissolves in the chrysalis before emerging transformed, you must allow your current identity to completely unravel so that the new one can emerge. When you finally embody this understanding, when you stop seeking outside what has always been within, when you cease asking permission to be who you truly are, then real command emerges naturally. People respond to you in ways that seem miraculous. Opportunities arise with perfect timing. Resources appear exactly when needed. But none of this is a miracle. It's simply the natural functioning of consciousness when it operates without obstruction. All change begins with understanding your role as a co-creator, and the only way to connect with this divine intelligence is through meditation. We've developed a set of audio tools to help you access this higher state of consciousness. To learn more and get immediate access, click the link on the screen or in the comments. If this video resonated with you, write in the comments, "It made sense to me."